Well, you wouldn't know by looking at this canopy of this forest here that it's mid-spring. It's the first week of May here in south central New England. We're in New London County, Connecticut. And cool April has led to a late leaf out. This area is known for a later leaf out than many areas I've put on this channel, but probably even a little later than normal right now. So we're going to spend some time with birches this spring and early summer. I spent about 4 or 5 weeks working on the oaks in February and March for winter identification. And we're going to start this series on the birches with some winter identification because they really haven't leafed out. But as I continue on this project, we will find them leafed out, I'm assuming, in the next few weeks. And we can use the leaves for identification as well. So let's zoom down to ground level here. We're at the Atkinson Family Preserve. This is in New London County, Connecticut, near the village of Gales Ferry. And fairly new to public ownership in the last 10 years. Acquired by the Avalonia Land Trust. We've got a lot of straight trees here that aren't very big. So when the land goes from grazing or open land to forest, it's a race to the top. And sometime winner takes all. In other words, the trees that overtop the smaller trees will become dominant. Other times there's quite a bit of succession that goes on. I've got right here is our yellow birch with its furling bark. These little peels and furls and whorls. And it's pretty unique in color. And right next to it is our black birch or sweet birch. And there's nothing really black about the black birch. It's more brown, but more of a tannish brown than the bronzish yellow of the yellow birch. We're going to spend quite a few times hiking, looking for different sizes and different aged examples of these trees. Neither one of these is more than 4 inches around, but you can see even on this 4-inch diameter yellow birch, it's already starting to curl and furl. And the black birch is smooth. With these white spots, you often see these white spots on some of the maples as well. So that is not actually the bark, but some kind of a fungus or algae growing on there. I'm not exactly sure what that is. If anybody wants to comment on that, I'd be glad to know. Here's a yellow birch, just a little bigger, about 6 inches around. I did some hikes in the Catskill Mountain area last fall, or late summer, early fall, where we found black or yellow birches that were in first growth forest, and as they get much older and larger, the bark becomes more blocky and less peely. A lot of that has to do with how old the tree is, not necessarily how big the tree is. Here's a couple more. 6-inch diameter double trunk black birch here with smooth bark. No cracks or blocks in it yet, but it will get that way with time. And here's a clump of yellow birch. Just around the corner we've got a grove of gray birch. So it is a race to the top in these woods. We've got some soft or red maple growing here. This is a fairly wet area some times of the year, so that's a good place for the softer maple, which is red maple. And a whole bunch of gray birch growing back here. A lot of it is already passed away, some of it's still alive. This one here's got fungus growing on the side and all the way up. So no longer alive. So our gray birch is actually often whitish in color, but not always as brightly colored in white, at least, as the paper birch. And it does not peel, but all birches, including this gray birch and the black birch and the yellow birch, have these lenticles, which are horizontal lines, which, from what I've been reading, allows the bark to breathe. So these are pretty tightly This bark is pretty smooth and pretty tight, and it needs a chance to breathe, so that's what that allows. We'll be studying gray birch, paper birch, yellow birch, black birch, and some river birch if I can find some. It's scattered in New England, but not scattered too widely or too common. I don't know of a location that I can get to right now, but I'm going to be researching that. Here's our gray birch. Again, this is 6 inches around. It has not started to peel and is a light tan or a white color. Sometimes it does get a gray appearance. And as they die, they fall down. The heartwood will rot away and the bark will be left behind much longer than the wood itself. That's true with the yellow birch and the paper birch as well. Here's some more gray birch here. This one's passed away. And as we come just a few feet from where we started this video, it's almost all gray birch here. A little bit of black cherry coming in here as well. Here's a whole clump of gray birch. And these are still alive, and we can't really see the branches from here. There are some branch scars on this tree, but they're not too obvious at this level. We'll revisit that when more opportunities come along. But I've done black birch, I've done gray birch, I've done paper birch, and river birch and yellow birch on this channel, but I haven't gone into great detail on the yellow, the black, the gray, or the paper, and I haven't done different examples and different habitats. Let's spend some time looking around these parks in central and south central New England, looking for more trees to really get a good sample of what these trees can tell us. And we're going to watch them as they leaf out in the next 4 to 5 weeks. And we've come about 25 miles north of that Atkinson family preserve. And we're still in New London County, Connecticut, but not by much. We're at the Sprague Land Preserve. We're almost in Windham County here. And I'm going to add a 4th birch to this first segment. And most of what I'm going to do today is on the black birch. That's the most common birch on the hikes I'm going to be doing today. But we do have a drier habitat here. With that really corky, thick bark of the scarlet oak that can withstand the brush fires that would be common on a dry, rocky hillside. One other tree that is often found in areas that burn, especially as you go further north from here, is the paper birch. So that gray birch had a white colored bark that did not peel, and the paper birch does. It peels readily. When it does peel, it exposes the bark that's cleaner, or in other words, doesn't have as much algae or lichen growing on it. So it appears to be pure white sometimes right after it starts to peel. And I think I got a few more in the background here. I'm going to go check out. They're either gray or paper birches on this steep, rocky, dry hillside that could easily burn during the drier seasons. And what caught my attention from probably 100 yards away was the tops of these paper birch trees. They're at the bottom of a cliff here, and there is a trail that goes past them. We'll check them out in a little while here. But it was the tops that were bright white and obvious from a distance away. Now I can't see the peeling from here because of the distance, but the height of these trees, they're as high as the oak trees that surround them and have a broader crown than a gray birch would ever get. So that alone is giving away the fact that it's a paper birch. I will confirm that for sure when I get to the bottom of this cliff. I'm on top of a 40-foot cliff here, but the trail does wind around to the bottom here. We'll come check them out in a little while here. But the bottoms of these trees is more of a gray appearance just because of the amount of algae that can grow on the bark in a moist environment when you get a lot of humid summers. Just like you get algae growing on the side of houses after several humid summers in a row, these trees can get that same appearance. But the top, where it's a little drier and less humid in the summer, has retained that white appearance that gave their identity away. And just below this 40-foot cliff, we do have the bottom of this paper birch tree. And yes, it would be easy to tell from the bottom as well because of the peeling, and the bark is quite a bit lighter, if not pure white, white enough that it's obviously not a yellow birch. And with the papery bark, it's obviously not a black birch. But this type of peeling is often common on the yellow birches, which aren't too common in this park. So we'll hold off till part 2 to do more with yellow birch. It's more common as you go inland and further north. At this latitude, it's most likely found near wetlands. Not always ponds or swamps, but areas where the soil is moist but not stagnant. But our paper birch, seen a few groves on this hike so far today, so it's not absent from this area, but it too becomes more common as you go further north. And actually, paper birch is one of the trees that grows all the way up into Alaska and across the entire North American continent through the northern forest zone. So obviously much lighter in color. White, if you peel this bark back just a little, it's almost pure white in places. And actually, if you peel it back even a little more, it has a distinctive orange color. You got one up here that fell down. Let's take a look at that. And often in areas that have gone back to forest over many generations, you find the graveyards of these paper birches and even gray birches sometimes, where they're no longer alive, but there's still plenty of the skeletons laying on the ground. The bark will be slow to decay sometimes. Here's one here that actually blew across the trail. And this one was actually still alive when it fell down because its twin, right in the background, is still standing. So, but not uncommon to find these trees. They're not long-lived. The gray birch and the paper birch are not long-lived. The yellow birch is the longest-lived of the 4 birches I'm working on right now. Gray birch and paper birch are pioneer species, and as the woods gets more mature, they do not seed in once the shade is deep. They're looking for places that are in full sun, and if the seeds land in the shade, they do not germinate. That's true with many pioneer species, including cottonwoods and aspens and willows. So we'll continue on and study these black birches in a little more detail as they come along. And we'll continue to add to our study of mostly black birch on this first segment. Southern New England in the medium soils that aren't extremely droughty is often one of the more common trees is black birch. It is unaffected by the gypsy moth and other pests that have decimated some of the forests around here. So we'll concentrate mostly on black birch on these first few hikes. That's what I'm going to find the most. And we'll look at a lot of different black birches. Well, I asked the question on the first segment of this video series, and sure enough, Google knew the answer. So yes, this is lichen. I wasn't completely wrong. It's not algae and it's not fungus. It's a combination of the two. And because these trees are so smooth, it's easy to see, but it grows on many different species of trees wherever it can. But these white blotches are obvious on these black birch bark and often on the red maple as well. But both those trees can become broken and blocky and chunky as they get older. The black birch technically doesn't peel. It more breaks into chunks that are much thicker than the peels on the paper birch, the river birch, or the yellow birch. Well, here's a black birch that's about 6 inches around, and it's still mostly smooth. And just a few feet away is a black birch that is the same size that has started to break into chunks. The bark is it doesn't really peel, but it's more like the thickness of a layer of cardboard that comes loose on this tree. And the older the trees get, the more it does that. To the point where one of the nicknames for black birch is cherry bark birch, because if you get enough of that, it can actually resemble the pattern on a black cherry. But the spurs on these black birch trees coming off, almost like the spurs on the back of a rooster's foot. Would make it easy to identify in early spring here when it's just starting to break bud here. Just starting to the first week of May here. So we'll keep an eye on these leaves as the next few weeks go on. I got one right over here that's a pretty good example of how unsmooth the bark on a black birch can get. So this tree's out here to stump the naturalist. And boy, that does have the pattern of a black birch, but I've learned black birch by the, or excuse me, it does have the pattern of a black cherry, but I've often learned black birch by the color, not by the texture. And this is definitely not that purplish color of a black cherry, but it is more of that light tan, bronzeous color of a black or sweet birch. So look at how these chunks have broken into little squares. So again, as these trees age, they no longer have that smooth bark. And I don't call this peeling just because the peels are much thicker and they don't curl up. So it's more like cardboard, the thickness of a layer of cardboard, maybe an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch thick. And they can actually curl up at times, but it's a little different than what you'd see on a yellow birch. And if you're around these trees enough, you would be able to tell them apart by that. But black birch does not always retain that smooth bark, even on this tree that's only about 10 inches around. And we'll continue to keep our eyes open for mostly black birch on these trails here today. And one thing I've been reading about is the black birch has become more common with the opening of the canopy from gypsy moth damage, and the fact that it is no longer being harvested to make birch beer. That can be done without harming the tree. It can be done in a laboratory with other chemicals. So it's becoming more common for that reason. The hemlock woolly adelgid has created openings in the hemlock forests, and the black birch is often coming in to replace that. But again, we got these white blotches, that lichen growing on the tree. So as I'm walking along today, I can almost tell they're black birches just by the blotches in this particular stretch of trail. I know from hiking on rainy days, those blotches become even more noticeable when the bark is wet. And one thing about many birches, the yellow birch and the black birch are very well known for growing on rocks or growing over a rotten log, and then the log completely rots away, and then the roots still show the shape of where the log was. This guy here is growing right on this ledge. This is mostly schist up here. So it's not the hardest rock in the world, but it's still a pretty challenging place to make a living. But the black birch is up for the challenge. I've seen these guys growing on talus slopes where they're growing basically over and between the boulders. And that's all that grows on some talus slopes in the central Appalachians in Pennsylvania. I've seen that quite often. Well, this guy, you know, I said they don't peel, and if we're going to define peeling as peeling like a piece of paper, then no, it doesn't. But in this case, this bark that's about a 1/4 inch thick is breaking free and coming loose on this black birch. And these flakes are quite large, the size of my hand, and that's not uncommon to see. Again, you can get that broken appearance, that cherry bark appearance. And yes, let's call this peeling. Even though they're as thick as a layer of cardboard, we might as well call it peeling because that's what it looks like. So the black birch is, you know, easy to identify when it's still young, and as it gets older, it can easily fool you for other trees if you don't know it well. That's why I'm making these more extensive videos on these oaks and birches this year. And we've got some moisture soil near the bottom of this waterfall here at the Sprague Land Preserve. And this is where yellow birch will make itself at home in latitudes where it's less common. This is where you would often find it. In the drier upland soils, it'd be uncommon if unheard of. So our little peels and furls are quite small on this tree, even though this tree is a couple feet in diameter. The peeling is less obvious on this tree than it can be on some trees. But it does have that bronze color that you do not get on the paper birch. In general, the peels on the paper birch and the river birch are much bigger than that of the yellow birch. I'm running out of time for this first segment on studying the birches. Let's finish off with a black birch that's up the hill here on a drier soil. It's all broken and cracked. And again, this can't be called cherry bark birch for that reason. Most of the ones I'm finding on these hikes don't look like this, but they can attain this appearance if given enough time. So here we are, a black birch with all kinds of little squares on it on this steep bluff overlooking this stream valley. And I can tell it's not a yellow birch because the upper branches aren't peeling. I can tell, but that isn't obvious in this video, especially on a day with dim light. We're going to take a look at the view from the top of this hill. We'll continue on in the next 3 or 4 weeks as these birches leaf out, and I will be traveling inland where there's more of the northern birches, the yellow and the paper birch, and we'll study those in greater detail at that time.